Hello, I'm Joseph Dillard, and welcome to our self-directed integral deep listening curricula. Today, I want to present how states, lines, and stages affect self-development from the perspective of IDL. Let's get started. While I have addressed states and stages in another video on IDL as a dream yoga, in this video we will be talking about developmental states, lines, and stages as they apply to self-development. Here's a basic breakdown. Prepersonal stages are associated with early childhood, when we are identified with our bodies and emotions. Our preverbal and cognition is largely metaphorical. A stable sense of self has not yet developed, and we are therefore amoral, like animals. This does not mean young children or animals cannot be altruistic or nurturing, but only that they lack morality that is based on an objectified sense of self. Nor does it mean that young children or animals cannot problem solve, but it does mean that the resources at their disposal, both internal and external, for problem solving are more rudimentary and limited. We have seen in the video I mentioned how sleep and dreaming are evolutionarily prior to the development of an objectified self-sense and are therefore prepersonal. That doesn't imply karma, dharma, fate, or predestination, although we can't rule out inherited aptitudes and characteristics as explanations for transpersonal access by children or criminals. It also doesn't mean that deep sleep and dreaming cannot or do not access the transpersonal. Transpersonal state access is available at all stages and on all lines. At a prepersonal level, we are our sensations and emotions. Personal stages are associated with life after the age of 4, when we develop a cognitively, verbally mediated identity, and we are identified with our thoughts, language, and the objectified sense of who we are that they make possible. Almost all of waking experience is a combination of the dreamlike scripting and cognitive biases that regulate our thinking, our conscious thoughts, and the worldviews that reflect who we are. We are mostly social selves, enmeshed in our familial, social, and cultural scripting, products of the zeitgeist into which we were born. Our sense of both freedom and individuality exists within the constraints of multiple conditioning contexts. At personal stages of development, we have the ability to talk and think about ourselves. I am going to play. I am going to eat. Wilber talks about this as what was an embedded, subjective, proximal self that is objectified as a distal self. We can now look at ourselves. We can begin to reflect on our motives, intentions, and the consequences of our choices. This is an early version of what is called, in meditative traditions, cultivating the witness. In reality, this objectification process is fundamental in all levels of evolution, from quarks through humanity. The 3 basic or core lines for the personal are the self-system, cognition, and the moral line. We develop a stable sense of who we are, we learn to reason, and we learn to differentiate moral action based on respect, reciprocity, trustworthiness, and empathy. However, these are skills, and once learned, there is no requirement that they will be enacted or demonstrated. People at any level of development can intend altruistic or moral behavior without actually doing so. This is because morality is ultimately determined by social norms including approval, law, and justice, not by personal intent and values. That, in turn, is due to the nature of morality itself as a mediator of relationships. Relationships, by definition, mediate between self and others, with the result that morals are not only intentional values held by individuals, but matters of collective determination. Transpersonal stages are not transpersonal states, which do not need to include prepersonal and personal stages. We know this because both children and criminals, as mentioned before, can access transpersonal states. Transpersonal stages are different in that they both include and transcend prepersonal and personal stages. Transpersonal stages are aspirational idealisms rather than concrete realities. Humans often believe they have attained transpersonal stages of development, when in reality they have identified with this or that highly developed line, or have confused access of a transpersonal state with an imagined belief that their self-development is therefore transpersonal. Transpersonal stages are essentially extrapolations of transpersonal state experiences from dreams and mystical experiences. They are mythological and largely prepersonal systems of belief. While there is a great deal of evidence for transpersonal states, evidence for transpersonal stages and lines that are transpersonal is problematic. IDL believes that most claims of transpersonal development are delusional and that they are best approached with an attitude of caveat emptor, buyer beware. We are better off focusing on developing and maintaining balance, whoever we are, wherever we are. That means focusing on remedial and adaptive forms of self-development and accessing transpersonal states through character interviewing, meditation, pranayama, or other means, rather than wasting time chasing imagined transpersonal utopias that often mask exceptionalism and elitism. This is because an overemphasis on the transpersonal can not only lead to elitism, exceptionalism, imbalanced line development, but the avoidance of the development of necessary weaker lines as well, in particular the moral line. The history of religion and spirituality is full of examples of this. In fact, it is much more difficult to find examples that are not. A general rule of thumb is that the farther back in history you go, the more enlightened gurus and teachers are, because so little actual information is actually known about their lives. In those cases where information is known, like that of Gautama Buddha, this corollary is demonstrated. IDL notes that society rewards exceptional development in various lines and takes for granted that it is based on balanced development. This generally results in high but narrow agentic self-development, which is inherently unstable and at some point collapses for lack of a broad enough foundation. Agentic is a term from Wilber's integral equa that refers to self-motivated development and is contrasted with communal or collectively motivated development. In an attempt to balance agentic self-development, IDL focuses on balanced, broad-based, communal stability, meaning that healthy self-development is based much more on having a broad and stable foundation and is much more important than having a narrow and unstable one that is based on high development in one or two lines, like cognition or spiritual intelligence. Do you have questions or comments? Let us know how we can help by sharing your interests in the section below this video or at Friends of IDL on Facebook. Thanks for watching. See you next time.